I've always loved roguelites from when I first started playing them. To be honest, I'm not even positive I remember the first one I played, but I think it was Rogue Legacy, which is a great game worth playing in its own right, but that's a subject for another video. To have a conversation about roguelites, first we have to come to an understanding of what a roguelike is. A roguelike is, as I understand it, a turn-based RPG with dungeons, enemies, loot, and things of the like being randomized. The other aspect of a roguelike is when you finish or lose a run, you take nothing with you into the next run. I believe games like Slay the Spire fit into this camp. Now that we have the most basic definition of a roguelike out of the way, we can talk about roguelites. Roguelites tend to have a meta progression between runs that make you more powerful between those runs, giving a sense of long-term progression. The interesting thing about roguelites is that the formula can be applied to other genres of games, so it's possible to have a roguelite first-person shooter, hack and slash, or even platformer. Now, with that definition in mind, this video will be focused more on the roguelite subgenre due to almost all Bullet Heaven games having a meta progression between runs and also not being turn-based. Although there are some aspects that apply to both, so I will be using the term roguelike when it can apply to both, as all aspects of roguelike can apply to a roguelite, but not necessarily the other way around. The aspect of roguelites that I really enjoy is the marriage of long-term progression and short-term progression. Each individual run fulfills the satisfaction of the short-term progression loop, in which you start out weak and become much stronger over time. Then, at the end of a run, there's some form of long-term progression, or persistence, that could be in the form of unlockable characters, weapons, items, or even permanent stat increases. This provides the game with long-term goals and makes you feel more invested over a longer term. Another aspect of a roguelike is the death run style of gameplay, in that it is expected that you will die many times before completing the objective. As mentioned before, roguelikes have a randomized progression system, so that when you die and restart, it's not always as simple as, I didn't play well enough. It may have been a situation where you didn't get good items that work well together, or maybe you just didn't play well enough. You can try again and experiment with different builds the game offers, which adds replayability and a potential for endless enjoyment, assuming the base game mechanics don't become stale. And in that last sentence lies what I love about roguelikes: the ridiculously high replayability and build variety. In a good roguelike, there isn't any one build that will always win, nor should there be builds that are just objectively bad, but more like different builds for different play styles, except for cases where the build has lots of items that just don't work well together. But ideally, the more you play and experiment, you'll learn what items, weapons, and stat combinations work well together and can make better judgment calls on what progression path will work for you. But enough about roguelites on a conceptual level. Let's talk about the Bullet Heaven roguelite subgenre. Games like Halls of Torment, Vampire Survivors, and Holocure as examples. First, we'll delve into what makes these types of games what they are, as this is a hyper-specific genre blend of gameplay from various other genres, mainly roguelites and in some cases dual joystick shooters. The idea of a Bullet Heaven shooter is the reverse of the Bullet Hell shooter, where you are dodging massive amounts of attacks and projectiles, whereas in a Bullet Heaven shooter, you're the one firing massive amounts of attacks against hordes of enemies, and you collect these attacks by either finding items in the world or leveling up your character. I absolutely love this style of gameplay, as it captures the idea of a roguelike in starting out very weak and fragile in the beginning of a run, then progressing to the end game of being very powerful and survivable, while throwing tons and tons of enemies at the player. Now, every individual game within the genre has its own subtleties that differentiate them from one another. One of the main selling points for me is the character variety. Take Vampire Survivors, for example. While every character on a baseline level plays the same, they all have different starting weapons and stats, and in some cases special abilities that can make every run stand out and feel different. Halls of Torment and Holocure take this a step further by having each character start with a weapon only they can use. On on top of having access to a plethora of others. By the way, if it wasn't obvious, these are the 3 games that will be the main talking points in this video, as the only other games I've played in this genre thus far is Brotato, and I haven't gotten very far in it yet, but intend to play more of that and many more very soon, including 20 Minutes Till Dawn, Disfigure, Pathfinder, Soulstone Survivors, wow that's a mouthful, and Wedding Witch and Kagura Survivors. Look, don't judge me. Now, I'm eventually going to make deep dive videos of Vampire Survivors, Holocure, and Halls of Torment, but for now, I'll do an overview of each one just to punctuate their similarities and differences. I'll be going over them in the order that I originally played them in for the sake of a coherent timeline. I absolutely love Vampire Survivors. Like most people, it was the first I played of this type of game, and I heard about it from a friend of mine whose brother played it on Xbox Game Pass, and I fell in love within minutes of starting it. As of writing this script, I have just over 90 hours on Steam and another 70 hours on the recent Nintendo Switch release. I also have the game on mobile, but honestly, it just doesn't work as well with a touchscreen. Although far from impossible to play it with a touchscreen, you're better off syncing a loose PlayStation or Xbox controller for that endeavor. On the other hand, it is free on mobile, so that's a bonus if you're strapped for cash. For those wondering, I bought it on Switch so I could play it whenever I have time to kill at work and plan to do the same thing with Brotato, but I digress. In Vampire Survivors, you're surviving against things that go bump in the night, collecting experience points from defeated enemies, and selecting one of 3 options, or occasionally 4 with a high luck stat when leveling up. You can potentially find new weapons with various forms of attacks or items that will boost your character's various stats. You survive for 30 minutes to complete the run, and the game relies on unlocks and gold as its progression system. I think there are a few key factors that set Vampire Survivors out from the pack and really make this one an amazing experience. The first and possibly most important factor if you have in-person friends who you play couch co-op games with is the recently added couch co-op. Up to 4 players, it is incredibly fun. I've only played 2-player sessions with my wife and my dad respectively, but both have been very enjoyable experiences and added a new strategic angle to a game that I thought I had already milked all the fun out of. Another aspect of Vampire Survivors it excels at is its roster of characters at a staggering 57 in total. 58 if you consider the random selection as a character. I do not. While I do think that compared to the likes of Holocure and Halls of Torment, the differences between the characters are far less substantial, which I'll get into more later on in the video, I do still think that it's a feat worth mentioning. By the way, Pugnala is my favorite character. And building off of that concept, I also believe that Vampire Survivors has the biggest selection of weapons, items, and maps, which can lead to a ton of build variety combined with the massive character roster. On top of the large weapon roster, you can also evolve weapons with the right weapon-item combo, and even combine certain weapons together for a union weapon for incredibly powerful results. A small bonus feature of Vampire Survivors, if you have a Switch or a compatible mobile device, is the fact that it can be played on the go. I'm someone who struggles with playing handheld games on the go, but for some reason Vampire Survivors lends itself super well to it. My only complaint is that it gets down to a single-digit frame rate when there's too much going on at once on screen. But if you're not overly sensitive to frame rate, then it shouldn't be a big deal. The final, and I think the defining aspect of Vampire Survivors that really sets it apart from its contemporaries is its secrets. There are a vast amount of secrets in the game that have so many unlocked conditions and have many different rewards, from characters to maps to bosses and more. I don't want to give anything away, but I will say my dumb caveman brain wasn't capable of figuring out the vast majority of those secrets on my own, and I had to use a guide for most of them on my first playthrough on PC. Regardless, I had a ton of fun finding them all, and it added a ton of value to the overall package. Speaking of value, the game itself is insanely cheap for what you get. I believe if you want the game and all of its DLC, it'll run you thereabouts $10, which is absolutely nuts for what you get for this game. I think as of the release of the Nintendo Switch version, the only platform it isn't available on is the PlayStation as of now. Fingers crossed that will eventually change though. Honestly, despite a few minor gripes about the endgame, I wouldn't even be making this video if not for Vampire Survivors, and this game will always hold a special place in my heart for being my first Bullet Heaven shooter game. I'm gonna be dead honest. Holocure is weird. It's very similar to Vampire Survivors, but instead of vampire hunters, wizards, and monsters, you're playing as real-life VTubers and fighting waves of mind-controlled fans. I will say this though, I absolutely love the music in this game. I can't think about Holocure and not think about the music from the first stage. Just listen to this. Incredible. It also has an entire side activity called the Holo House, where you can farm items and some extra holo coins, the game's currency. To be honest, I'm not overly fond of this mechanic, but in the 40 hours I've put into the game so far, I haven't really felt like I've missed anything by not engaging with it. But I do want to give it more of a fair shake in the future, but I'll save that for the deep dive. But anyways, going back to the holo coins, there are a number of uses for them outside of the standard powering up of your stats. You can use them for the gacha system for a chance to unlock the game's various characters, costumes for those characters, and if you get the same character more than once, that character will get a permanent stat boost to compensate you for not getting a new one. And I know what you're thinking, this is all done through the in-game currency. The game is actually 100% free, from its initial price tag down to in-game purchases. Your wallet can rest easy with this game. Anyways, I really like this system as it adds a layer of chance to your spending, but it also sections the characters off by category so as to keep it from being too random. And you also get a secondary currency for buying characters and costumes directly if you spend enough in a particular category. It's a surprisingly deep and well thought out system that I really appreciate, if not a little grindy, but honestly, I don't come to these kinds of games for a quick playthrough, so it's not a big deal for me. While the weapon selection at a glance might seem a bit more limited than Vampire Survivors, it makes up for this by every character having their own dedicated weapon, skills, and a cooldown based ultimate attack that all feel very unique to their respective characters. By the way, Hako's Bales, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, is my favorite character by far, focusing on critical hits, making my runs feel much more manageable. And speaking of, this game is difficult. Like, really difficult. Both Vampire Survivors and Halls of Torment both have revival mechanics, and Holocure, to the best of my knowledge, has no such mechanic, unless it's obtained through the Holo House somehow. Hey, future me here. Just wanted to clear this up. There absolutely is an item that lets you revive in Holocure. It's called the Feather, I think it's called. Anyways, just wanted to clear that up. Of the three, I would probably put a Holocure at the bottom of my list of favorites, but I don't want to undersell this game. It's fun as hell, and even though it's the quirkiest by far with its presentation, there's a ton of fun to be had here, and at the $0 price point, you'll be hard-pressed to find a game at a better value on Steam. Halls of Torment may actually be my favorite of the three, where in Holocure and Vampire Survivors, you gain items and weapons through leveling up and have a max amount of items you can carry of each. Items have a different mechanical use entirely in Halls of Torment, and the level up system is used to boost your character's stats, or traits as they're called here, so you aren't pinned down to just 6 items to boost your stats with. You also don't collect new weapons with level ups. They're collected through scrolls either on the maps themselves or by killing certain special enemies. I particularly enjoy this aspect of the game as it allows you to focus your level up solely on making your character stronger, and you're not limited by item slots in the same way you are with Vampire Survivors or Holocure. I love the style of this game, where Vampire Survivors has a feel that makes me nostalgic for the days of the Super Nintendo, and Holocure has a distinct chibi style to it. Halls of Torment has a striking early Diablo or even Gauntlet style of gameplay that feels much more grim than the others. The music, while not my favorite of the three, is very memorable with its heavy use of drums, which captures the mood of the game perfectly. I mean, just listen to this. While it has by far the least amount of characters and weapons, it makes a little go a very long way as far as variety goes. All 9 characters have their own personal weapons and distinct playstyles. The starting character, the swordsman, is a great jack-of-trades style character. The archer is a highly offensive character with little in the way of defense but high mobility to compensate. And the warlock has no particularly good stats but has a heavy reliance on summons to aid him in battle, just to give a few examples of how distinct these characters feel. In both Holocure and Vampire Survivors, I have a favorite character in both that I almost always default to unless I have a specific reason not to. But in Halls of Torment, I honestly couldn't decide between the characters when starting a run, and I think there's only one that I downright don't like, that being the Beast Tamer. I don't hate the character, but towards the end of my time with the game wrapping up the achievements, that was the only character I avoided like the plague unless I specifically needed that character for an achievement. But when there was an achievement that wasn't character specific, I honestly couldn't decide who to play because they're all so fun. Another cool aspect of the game is the equipment system, which feels like in concept inspired by games like Diablo. But don't be mistaken though, this isn't even close to the same variety that you would find in an ARPG like Diablo, but I really like that the items can be sent up via a well system once the well keeper is rescued. Basically, once a run, you can send up a new item that you find up through the well, and the well keeper will then sell you the item, so you can decide to start every run with the item. It adds an extra layer of progression that I really enjoy. The last aspect of Halls of Torment that I really like is the potion system, which I really wished that I spent more time investing in it earlier on in the game, as it is way more useful than it initially appears, letting you reroll trait and weapon selections, delete undesirable traits for the remainder of the run, force a trait to stay in your selection until you actually choose it, or even take one trait twice in a single level up. The way that you get these potions is very cool as well, as you collect the ingredients and bottles as you play for the cupbearer who makes them for you. These bottles can drop from specific enemies, and the ingredients can be found scattered throughout the maps. Halls of Torment is an absolutely incredible atmospheric game that is an absolute must for any roguelite enjoyer. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really think about a conclusion when I started this video, and I don't really have a good way to end this, but I mainly wanted to use this as an excuse to talk about the type of game that I like and share how much fun I have playing them. It's a genre that I want to see grow, and I want to have more conversations about it to help that discourse. I know that this video is a little scattershot and all over the place, but hopefully it didn't come off as too wild or inconsistent. Let me know what you think about these games. Which one's your favorite? Do you have any suggestions for me to play? I'd be very interested to know. Anyways, if you liked what I had to say and want to see more, you know what to do. Have a good one.